station where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.
So here we go for our 21st year in the same room, talking rubbish.
There's still no hot water either.
And there's still no hot water. Nothing changes in 20 years, but there we are. And there's still noise from the scouts down below. But you wouldn't have it any other way now, would you? And I'd like to say a particularly big welcome to Jason Porthouse, one of our very early members, relatively speaking, and indeed it was Jason who used to collect the money at the door in the old days. So nice to see you. Welcome back. Indeed, yes. Now he's thoroughly embarrassed. I forget you're here now. Okay. As you already know, this evening we have Helen, who not only has to collect her own money at the door, has to stand up and give a talk as well, but we shall come to Helen shortly. I would like to start on a serious note and dedicate this talk, as I've been dedicating a lot of talks recently, to one Robert Greene. And if you've been concentrating at all, and any of the emails have been going round, you'll know Robert Greene, to cut a long story short, has been attempting to act as a lawyer for Holly Greig, who is a Down syndrome woman who claims that she was abused years ago. And the problem is that some of the people she's accusing basically are quite high up the ladder in Scottish authorities. And so naturally enough, they don't want it investigated. That's not the reasons they give, of course. The reasons they give for why they won't give it a proper hearing is that there's not enough evidence. But of course, part of the problem is because Holly is Down syndrome, their assumption is therefore that she can't be relied on. Although that does miss the fact that there are other witnesses, although sadly one of them I believe was her brother, who's now dead in mysterious circumstances, but that's another story. The fact is, whatever you do or don't think about the Holly Greig case, Robert Greene is the nicest man you could meet. If anybody's ever sat down with him and chatted, as we have, you will know that he's just a man with no other motivation than wanting to help Holly and her mother. But in the course of this, he's basically been campaigning up in Scotland to, get a proper sort of legal investigation going. And so he decided the best way to do this was to do a lot of leafleting, and so he kept getting into trouble for leafleting, which has now become a heinous crime, plainly. And in the end, basically, they arrested him for breach of the peace. His computers were impounded, lots of horrible things happened, people broke into his house, and then having been basically bailed on breach of the peace, he did go out and started leafleting again because he just feels, well, I've got to. Anyway, for that, he is now in prison for a year at HMP Aberdeen, and if you, believe that there is any kind of justice or truth left in this country, then you really need to ask somebody why this is. Whether it be writing to your MP or just writing to the Scottish authorities or anything really. There is a campaign. If you go to the website freerobertgreene.co.uk, you can find out all about the case. It really is truly disgraceful because in essence this man has been branded a criminal when there are real criminals wandering around that somehow never seem to meet justice. And just purely from a compassionate act, Robert's in prison. That is totally wrong. He's very cheerful, apparently, in good spirits, all things considered. Loads of people are writing to him, to the point that the prisoner are actually getting a bit sort of sick of it, really. There's so many floods of letters. But the reason that there are so many floods of letters is that because, of course, people see the injustice of it and they know that it's not right. So please find out more about Robert Greene, and by default you will find out more about the Holly Greig situation. Are there any seats at the back? I do believe there are one or two seats you can squeeze into if you can find your way through there. I'm going to keep that one reserved at the front if that's alright. So yeah, check out Robert Greene because it is something serious, because in essence that of course could be us. What it now means is that you just out there campaigning for something peaceful and just trying to get to the truth of something, you could now be branded a criminal. I have been in contact with Norman Baker MP, who's usually pretty good on this kind of thing. I mean, his response is a truthful one in as much as he says, because this occurred in Scotland, there is only so much that English MPs can do, because they have quite a different kind of law system over there. That said, he is still going to write to the Scottish Advocate General, whoever they are, and try to get to the bottom of what's going on and see if he can raise some awareness. So there are people, you know, getting into channels that might make a difference, but it is still a long haul, and it may well be that the Advocate General writes back and says, well, tough matey. But you know, if everybody raises some kind of stink about it, then, you know, it might get somewhere. On the other hand, you might get, like Martin Noakes wrote to, I think it was Francis Maude, who's not known to be the most active politician in the world, who basically said, yes, isn't it a disgrace, but I can't do anything, goodbye. As opposed to, even I will write and find out. But at least, you know, there's no excuse to say that there's no awareness there. So I do feel particularly strongly about this, because it is something that could sooner or later impact on all of us in this world. So go away and find out more about that, and you know, who knows, maybe this will turn out to be a mistake on the part of the authorities, because of course by having done this, they've actually raised more awareness of the Holly Greig case as opposed to less. I think they're hoping that by shutting him up it will dissuade anybody else from trying to make a difference, but what it has done is taken it wider, so it might horribly backfire on them, and well, good if it does. So there you go, so that's Robert Greene. We'll find out more about that. What else can we say? What else is going on at the moment? America. Let's start with America. That's always fun, isn't it? Have you seen the election candidates for the, well, you know, for the whatever Republican Party? Aren't they terrible? I mean, you've got a choice of, you know, Newt Gingrich, who is arguably the most repulsive of all of them. Was it Mitt Romney? Trust me, I'm a millionaire 38 times over. And then, of course, there's Ron Paul. Now, Ron Paul is a very controversial figure. If you don't know much about Ron Paul, we'll find out, because there is a big kind of accusation at the moment that the American media is misrepresenting, you know, all these very complex electoral processes that they're going through over there. Because Ron Paul has actually won a lot more seats, they don't call them that over there, but you know, than is being reported. You wouldn't even know he existed, according to the American media. And yeah, in terms of election results, he's actually doing quite well. And what's interesting about that is that he is trying to raise awareness of a lot of the things that we would be interested in. And has been, you know, pretty frank in wanting to reopen investigations into things like 9/11 and all of that, which of course is one of the very reasons that they won't report that he exists. There is another view, which is held by some conspiracy theorists, that he in himself is a setup. Isn't the wonderful world of conspiracy marvellous? So there are others, of course, who are attacking him, saying, ah, yes, well, he's a government shill and all of this. Well, I don't know. But the fact that they're not reporting it, of course, is very sort of disturbing, because therefore, as ever, what we're being presented with is a sort of a fake view of what's going on over there, and you would think everything you see reported over here that everybody over there is a marauding right-wing Tea Party activist. That's not true. There's a lot of people who, you know that the whole system and everything that's going on is wrong, but they're just not getting the airtime. And with people like Fox News, you know, commanding so much of the media share, you don't stand a chance. I mean, what I thought was marvellous with Fox News was that the Fox News channel actually attacked the Muppets recently. Did you hear this? So the Muppets have now been branded, was it liberal somethings or another, you know, a threat to civilization. And the new, I'm not joking, this is true. And the new Muppet movie is, you know, everything that's wrong with the world. And believe it or not, you can look this up on the internet, there's a marvellous press conference with Kermit and Miss Piggy. And Miss Piggy actually corrects their really good joke. And I can't remember what they said now, but one of the accusations was, oh, you know, trying to find the truth with the Muppets, forget it. And they said, yeah, trying to find news on Fox News, forget it as well. There's a great line from Miss Piggy, only she can say it in the way she does. So there we are, we're now in a state where even the Muppets are having to speak out against Fox News and the right-wing invasion over there. So we live in strange times, but there we are. Talking of strange times, what else can we moan about? Syria. Listen, Syria, Libya, and all of that. I mean, what I think we need to get a balance on here is that the people who are trying to change their lives are generally doing it for the right reason. There is a feeling that it's been hijacked by a lot of Western influence, trying to set different factions against each other. And again, they're just not accurately reporting what's going on. I mean, if you believed everything you read on the mainstream news at the moment, you would assume that, you know, Mr. Assad was committing every atrocity going. Well, it doesn't take you far if you look at other news websites from around the world to get another side of the story, because it does seem pretty clear there are as many atrocities being carried out by the rebel forces as Assad, and neither side is correct to do that. They're all bastards, basically. But just as happened in Libya, the rebel faction has been promoted as the great hope for Syria, and what that means is basically a bunch of tin pot militias that will be friendly to the West for a while anyway. And there's a lot of disturbing feelings, of course, because of its proximity to Israel. The whole thing's a massive hotbed, even more so than Libya was. And some are saying Libya was just a kind of a, you know, rehearsal, really, and the Syria's what it's all about. It's a nasty business. And there's no question that the political sort of situation is really hotting up, and you've got Israel threatening to nuke Iran. It's very funny, isn't it? They want to stop a nuclear war by starting a nuclear war, basically. They're threatening nuclear attacks, and what seems is going to happen is that the Americans will just let them and then come in and say, right, time to stop now, everybody, and appear wise and benevolent. But of course, and it's not just the Americans, we're letting this happen as well, collectively. And anybody that saw David Cameron in America the other week sucking up to Obama, it really was horrible, wasn't it? You know, it's like you just don't really stand a chance, do you, of getting anywhere. But anyway, all of this is going on. So, you know, here we are, 2012. 2012, we've been talking about it for so long, and politically things are hotting up. And we certainly do, I think, need to be very aware of what's going on. And, I mean, I don't go too far down the fear-mongery route. It's World War III, because I heard all that 10 years ago when 9/11 happened. I don't think it'll be quite like that, but it's certainly serious. And what is particularly disturbing at the moment is how misrepresented the situations are in our mainstream media. It's pretty bad. So don't believe everything you're told. Go away and find out some other sources and try and find where the truth lies. It's usually in the middle somewhere. Meanwhile, solar activity, very high again. And you would have seen those images of the northern lights and all of that. Of course, a lot of people are saying, you know, the big solar flares, this is all part of 2012 and all that. Although the actual peak of the current sunspot cycle is, in fact, in 2013, next May, so you know that doesn't mean you couldn't have an enormous, very damaging solar flare now, but the actual peak's next year, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But you know, it's all in a way started to tie up with what so many people have been talking about for so long, and of course you're going to get the astrological perspective on that this evening, so we do live in interesting times. Now, what else can we tell you? Just a couple of last things. In the world of crop circles, nothing yet, as far as I can see, anywhere in the world, but it can't be long. There's usually something, you know, mid-April time. Although sometimes we've had them around the world earlier than this, but not as yet, as far as I can see. Lots of UFO sightings, though. Has anybody seen those films of those weird rings in the sky and they wobble and shift and change their shape? Again, you just don't know if they're fake or not, but there are several different videos taken around the world, and they're these sort of beautifully colourful, sort of wobbly rings that some are describing as portals, which of course is a bit of an assumption. But nonetheless, they are very interesting. Look them up. They're all over YouTube if you seek for them, and they're very interesting. So there's some weird things going on. And of course we've got the Olympics and all of that. Some of the crop circle researchers, by the way, are saying that maybe people shouldn't report the crop circles this year, should any of them. Because if we do, there'll be such a massive rush of visitors from the Olympics coming over to the wanting to go and see crop circles that you know, the Wiltshire fields would be full of them, and it'll spoil it for all the croppies, basically is what they're saying, and that we should not report them. But I think that's silly, personally. I mean, listen, the crop circles, if they were ever there for anything, they were there for everyone, weren't they? And to suddenly say, "Oh, we'll hide them from the tourists," this is a nonsense, in my view. You know, yes, I mean, of course, the farmers would get very annoyed or more annoyed if lots of people go down there. But, you know, come on, you've got to strike a balance here. So anyway, but there we are. It'll be interesting to see whether we do get lots and lots of the best crop circles ever for 2012, or literally nothing. Last year, you may remember, seemed to be in the decline of numbers. And who knows, if it was all about building us up for 2012, well, here we are. You know, we weren't listening all those years. You know, what's the point of keeping going? But, or we might get absolutely astonishing stuff. So we'll have to see, won't we? By the way, Colin Andrews, who you will know is a bit of a sort of veteran crop circle researcher, was just given a Lifetime Achievement Award at the UFO Congress a few weeks ago. And in fairness, he should be congratulated for that. We've had some issues with Colin over the years, but there's no doubt that he did help put crop circles on the map. So somebody's given him an award, and I know he'll be very happy with that. Given that this is a man that once claimed he addressed the United Nations, and after poking about a bit, it turned out to be a UN staff social club, which is not quite the same, really, is it? Bless his cocksocks. But good on him. Good on him. He has done something. The Glastonbury Symposium, I was hoping to have a leaflet. There isn't one, but bookings are open. If you don't know what the Glastonbury Symposium is, well, now's your chance to find out. 3 days of all of this stuff and more in wonderful Glastonbury. And it's this year, the 27th to the 29th. With the Crop Circle Coach Tour, assuming there are any to see, on Thursday the 26th. Look it up, glastonburysymposium.co.uk, lots of good speakers, people like Dolores Cannon, and Adrian Gilbert, and lots of interesting people. So find out, have a look on the website, and hopefully there'll be some leaflets here for next time. We have, the fact that you're here, you must have seen the emails, so we have announced our speakers for this year. I'll just briefly give you a clue what's coming up if you've forgotten. Hopefully, next meeting in May, 24th of May, we've got Scott Forbes. Now, Scott is a guy who worked in one of the Twin Towers, and was one of those that claimed that they witnessed about a week or so, or a few days actually, before 9/11, these strange workmen came into the towers and they turned all the power off and turned all the security cameras off, and nobody knows to this day what they were doing. And he witnessed this, and he's going to come and talk about this. Because, you know, the skeptics have tried to attack him over the years, said he's made it up, but he clearly hasn't. Because just recently, there's been quite a lot of fuss about these strange minivans that were parked up around the Twin Towers, sort of on and off for about 2 or 3 weeks before the big day. This has only just come to light, and somebody must have just said to somebody about these minivans, and went, oh yeah, I remember them as well, what were they doing? And suddenly people have realised, yeah, that was a bit suspicious really, wasn't it? So the arguments being obviously that these may have been the people that laced the buildings with explosives. If you don't believe there were explosives in there, read David Ray Griffin. You know, go away and find out, because the official story, sadly, is a lie. I think you can't come to any other view when you look at the evidence. Anyway, following that, 12th of July, we've got Richard Smith. Richard will be known to some of you if you've been to the Glastonbury Symposium. He was a co-founder of the Parallel Community with Hamish Miller. Anybody knows about that setup? And he's going to come and talk about everything that's going on now and what's coming up in the future, get a good perspective on that. 20th September, some guy called Andy Thomas is rounding up the crop circles. Well, of course that will be cancelled if there aren't any crop circles. We'll do something else. And then 22nd of November we've got Nigel Grace. Nigel's an interesting guy. Some of you may have seen this already, but he's been out in Bosnia investigating these claimed pyramids, which allegedly are buried under the ground, and people thought they were natural hills, but they've just realised in recent times that it looks like they're not. Now, you know, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but he's been out there, so he's going to come and share what's going on with the Bosnian pyramids. So you've got to wait till November for that, and the world could have ended by then, of course. And I mean, as for 2012, we're nearly at the big moment here. I mean, the media is predictably being very moronic about it. I mean, even as soon as we got into the first week of 2012, you had people scoffing, saying, there we are, here we are in 2012, the world didn't end. Well, of course that shows their ignorance anyway, because A, the big date is the end of this year, as you surely know, 21st of December 2012, not the beginning, and B, who really said the world would end? there's one reference in a Mayan prophecy about the end of the world, but if you take that symbolically or figuratively, you know, it's being really over-literal. And there's a concerted, I think, pattern in the media at the moment to basically debunk the whole 2012 thing. And of course, when we get beyond 21st of December and the world is still here, they'll go into overdrive with that. But they're missing the point. And I hope, you know, we're going to pick this up very much tonight, that what this was always about, if you really look at the prophecies, was consciousness shift. Well, it's happening, in my view. There's such awareness. There are so many people challenging what we've been forced to accept for years. People know they're not being told the truth. This is the consciousness shift. And maybe the big picture's going to take decades to pass, maybe centuries, but as far as I'm concerned, we're in it. So anybody that says there's nothing happening in 2012, they're not looking around them. And they're also being, you know, far too literal. There are some people that do think it will all happen on 21st of December. Helen, you're in contact. One guy's going to throw himself off Bell Rock at the exact moment of the solstice. Because he won't go splat, he'll go into the fifth dimension. But if he's wrong, it's going to be... But joking apart, I mean, this guy's got kids, you know. It's sad, So we've got to be balanced here. We'd all love to go to the fifth dimension, I'm sure. Whether they'll let us in is another matter. But you know, you've got to strike a balance. This could be a very gradual thing, whatever this changes. But there are people who are that literal about it. So it's going to be a funny old year. Anyway, we'll meet that nearer the time. So, our guest tonight is delectable Helen Sewell. Now, she's not here just because she's my fiancée. We get married this year. If only, so if anybody said nothing happened in 2012, we can say, yes it did, it's a big year for us. But this is not just, was it nepotism? She's here because she knows her stuff. And anybody that's seen Helen speak before or read her articles will know that she knows her stuff. The astrological perspective of what's going on now, in a way, reveals more than anything you're going to read in the newspapers or whatever, because beyond the obvious prophecies and whatnot, there are a lot of astrological, if you like, transits and shifts which could have a dramatic effect. And we talked about this here. When I looked, I was shocked to see it was about 4.5 years ago. Helen did an early version of this talk. Well, of course, a lot's happened since then. A lot of what she said back then has come uncannily true. So we're not expecting big predictions tonight, but some will be nice. But I think it'll be interesting to look at it again now we're here, and see what's coming up in the next few months maybe, or the kind of thing, because it's not mega predictive, but you know, I think we're in for an interesting ride. So, with no further messing about, unless anybody has anything you want to say at this point? Yeah, no? Right. Helen Sewell, welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Now, as Andy said, the talk this evening is going to be on the astrology of 2012, and so because of that,
Go on. Try not to take that seat, can you leave that one? You'll squeeze in somewhere at the back of the shop. Jason, could you hit that switch there? I don't know whether that's going to be too dark. Just hit that there for a minute, and we'll see what it looks like. Oh, of course they've taken the middle light out, haven't they? That's right. You need more light like that. Yeah, the trouble is Helen needs a bit of light. You might have to pop that back on, Jason, I'm afraid. Hopefully we'll see what we're... they've taken that strip out, haven't they? Right, okay. We'll cope. You'll soon find out. We'll moan if we can't say.
okay, well, I think it's great to be able to give a talk to mainly non-astrologers. Are there any people in the audience that understand astrology and can read astrological charts? No. Okay. Well, don't panic, because hopefully the charts that I'm going to put up will be fairly self-explanatory. And basically, to give you a sort of a brief synopsis of what the whole 2012 thing is all about, I'm just going to read a little bit of text. Which one do I press?
It may be because I've been away.
Oh, right.
You're right.
Okay. So basically, it's a 5,125 year cycle. It's recorded around the world by several ancient civilizations, most famously the Maya, but also the Aztecs, the Incas, the Maori, the Chinese, and the Zulus, amongst others, together with many Native American tribes. This period is almost certainly based on astronomical observation and possibly solar cycles. The ancients all had prophecies and predictions which say that a huge change always comes to the planet and its peoples when the time cycle ends and begins again. Now, according to the ancient calendars, the turning of the next great cycle will occur on the winter solstice at exactly 11:11 on the 21st of December 2012. Now, all very exciting stuff, and there are other sort of things around that indicate that this is indeed a time of great change. People that have had kind of near-death experiences and had visions of the future, people that have had drug-induced states of consciousness that have also given them visions, have all come back and talked about this period we're in, of a lot of changes, both socially and to the planet herself. John Major Jenkins tells us about the galactic alignment, so that at the moment the Sun is exactly at galactic centre. And so therefore we're open to the kind of the super waves that come from the centre of the galaxy, and a lot of people say that that has quite an effect on human evolution. Paul Laviolette talks about the galactic superwave in particular, which is a pulse of electromagnetic energy that comes from the centre of our galaxy, and we're in that now. So, what they've all got in common is a huge transformation for mankind. And there's often talk about more natural disasters happening, earthquakes, floods, volcanic activity, etc. But if you want to know more about the Mayan prophecies and all the different prophecies from around the world, I really would recommend Jeff Stray's book. And he kind of started his career off in this direction here in this very room. There's a couple of copies over there for you to look at. But tonight I'm going to talk about astrology, which I feel is a very maligned, misunderstood subject that so many people dismiss. And they just read the sun sign columns in the newspapers, and they get a very, very warped sense of what a true astrology is, which is a very, very ancient art. It goes back to the Babylonian Empire in the 19th century BCE. And in those days, the ancients would observe the movement of the heavens and watch the correlation of what went on in their society, and they would notice that wars, famines could be predicted by looking at the cycles of the stars, as above, so below. Now, then in the 4th century BCE, it spread to the Greeks, and Plato and Aristotle made it a respected science, and then it spread to the Romans and the Arabs, and eventually around the whole globe. Now, in early history, there wasn't really any concept of the individual as such. So therefore, it was thought only appropriate to do an astrological chart, which is recording the positions of the planets at the moment of birth, of the king or the queen of the country, because when the king or the queen fared well, the country fared well. When the king or queen was sick, then the whole country was in a bad state. So it was very, very predictive in those days. And it seemed, when you look at old texts of astrological predictions made for the kings and queens, how uncannily accurate that was. I mean, some say it was a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, but I don't know. You can watch the cycles throughout history and realise that there is definitely a correlation. Nowadays, on the whole, astrology is used in a different way. I personally don't use it as a particularly predictive tool, you know, that you're going to meet a tall, dark, handsome man, that kind of thing. We're much more aware of personal growth and the process of individuation these days, especially since the discovery of the 3 outer planets. I don't know the mechanism of how astrology works, it's just that there seems to be so much evidence and proof that it does. I also think it's the best map of the psyche that we've got, and people like famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung used astrology to help him understand his clients. So I don't believe astrology can tell you exactly what's going to happen, but if you look back through history and watch the cycles, you can get a pretty good idea of the sorts of energies that are around, and therefore it makes it predictive in that way. So here we come to the chart of the moment that a lot of people are talking about. And for those of you who don't know much about astrology, or maybe have never seen an astrological chart, this is a map of the heavens. I don't know if for those at the back possibly can't see the key on the left-hand side, but this darker line here is the Earth's horizon, and there's a darker line that runs through from top to bottom, and the top is the mid-heaven, and this is below the Earth, and so this is the position of the planets at that time. And it is readable, if you like. It's a map. It's the same as any moment in time. Like, is a birth of something, and it can be read. So the reason I chose London to do this and not, say, Peru or Egypt or somewhere like that is because I believe that this country in particular is going to play quite a special part in the transformation process that we're in. And also because I live here and I give talks about it here, and people are obviously curious about what's going to go on in this country. So when I first started to explore this about 6 years ago, when Jeff Stray asked me to look at the astrology of 2012, and I did the chart for the winter solstice, which is the exact moment. The first thing I got very excited about was the time. And for those of you who have heard anything about the 11:11 phenomenon, and it is a global phenomenon, it stems mainly from this woman called Solara, and she's a mystic who lives in Hawaii, I believe. And what she said was there was going to be 11 doorways that open. The first one opened on the 11th of January 1992, and the last one opened on the 11th of November in 2011, so last November. And each time she says a doorway opens, there's a new shift of consciousness. And she talks about this transformation that we're going through. So, looking at this chart, to see what gives me clues about this shift in consciousness. First of all, we've got the Sun, which is at 0 degrees Capricorn. Now, Capricorn is the last of the earth signs, and if there's anything to do with physical manifestation, the element of earth really brings that into being. So I thought that was quite significant. I think it's interesting that Jesus' birthday is put in the sign of Capricorn, because to me that speaks of something spiritual incarnating into flesh, if you like, into actual physical matter. And the two planets most associated with upheaval and change are the planet Uranus and the planet Pluto up here. Now, at the moment, coming up this summer, they will be in a particularly dynamic aspect, and this aspect goes on for about 3 years. It's a long transit, this one, and it's the lines that you see between the planets are very, very important in astrology, because they speak either of harmony or tension or challenges. So the square aspect, the 90-degree aspects, the 180-degree aspects, is where we see a lot of change and upheaval and disruption. And they are in a very dynamic square aspect. And because they're so important in this particular chart, I want to give you an overview of both these planets individually. So for any Aquarians in the audience, or even people with an Aquarian ascendant or moon in Aquarius, might be able to relate to some of what I've got to say about Uranus. He's the maverick of the solar system. He's the idealistic sky god, and his worldview, his vision, is orderly and perfect. He's the one with that utopian dream. He's the great awakener, and he gives us that eureka moment. He rules systems, connections, astrology, electricity, the new inventions and trends, anything alternative, innovative or different from the norm. So if you get the idea of that Aquarian, Uranian energy. And with the three outer planets, if you look to see what was going on in society at the time they were discovered, which means for the first time that consciousness is coming into the collective, it gives us real clues as to what is going on. And Uranus was discovered in 1781, and if we look back to the late 1700s, it was a time of huge turmoil. There were 3 revolutions going on. We had the Industrial Revolution, and if you think how much that brought mankind on, we had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and in fact the catchphrase in the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity or death, kind of sums up Uranus quite well. But if you think of that revolutionary energy, it's very much in the spirit of idealism, but it doesn't always acknowledge the human cost involved in getting to that ideal. So if you can see, it's very, Uranus can be quite cut off in that regard. So if we look at the actual photograph of Uranus on the right, the other planets that have got rings, the rings go around horizontally, so even the rings around Uranus are, if you like, eccentric. And on the left-hand side, we see an idealised image of the myth of Uranus when he comes down and mates with the earth goddess Gaia, which is quite a strange mixture of energies, because Uranus embodies the masculine principle of pure rational thought, and Gaia embodies the feminine principle of earthiness, which is chaotic and messy. So it's quite an interesting mix. And in the myth, Gaia gives birth to a whole host of offspring, but they were all kind of like monsters, giants, monsters, and Uranus, wanting perfection, looked at his offspring and couldn't bear the sight of their imperfections, so he buried them deep in the earth, so that it's not to offend his sight. Yeah, not the best dad in the world. So you get the idea of, the idealism of Uranus. Now the other Greek god associated with the planet Uranus is Prometheus. Now, in the myth, Prometheus had a real affinity with mankind because he made them out of the dirt from under his fingernails. So he wanted to enlighten mankind and for them to become more than what they were. But Zeus, king of the gods, didn't want this. He wanted mankind to remain ignorant. But Prometheus, one day, he decides to go, and this is an image of him stealing fire from Hephaestus' forge because they didn't have fire. And he gave it to mankind so that they might advance and become enlightened. Well, you can imagine what Zeus thought of this. He was enraged, and as a punishment he chained Prometheus up in the Caucasus Mountains, and every day an eagle came down and pecked out his liver, and every night it grew back in an eternal suffering. So you can see that this is quite a powerful image. And wherever Uranus is in your particular birth chart, if it's very strongly placed, you tend to have that sort of energy around you, being truth seekers and wanting to find enlightenment. You're on a path, you're on a journey. So it's about stepping out of the box and being different from the norm. And I'd like you to keep in mind this Prometheus spirit throughout the talk, actually. And if you think of other Promethean spirits throughout history that have stood up with a new idea that might bring mankind on, they've often suffered terribly for this. So it's like a metaphor for that Promethean spirit. Copernicus, who formulated a heliocentric cosmology. Darwin challenged the religious beliefs at the time. Martin Luther King challenged racism, saying all men are equal. Anyone challenging the status quo is met with huge resistance from society at first, but then gradually it seeps into the collective and we move another step forward. So that's Uranus. Okay, so anybody with a strong Uranus in their chart should be able to relate to that kind of energy. Pluto. Now he's a completely different kettle of fish. Here on the right we have the best photograph that we've got of Pluto thus far, because it's the furthest planet, and I still would like to call it a planet, though he was demoted. And his moon Charon. He's known as the Dark Lord of the Underworld in myth, and here on the left is Pluto with his three-headed dog Cerberus guarding the gates to the underworld. He's the most powerful planet in the zodiac. He rules the primal forces of birth, death, sex and transformation, evolution, even the annihilation of a whole species in the sort of the wheels of evolution. He rules the hidden, shadowy underworld of society. He rules magic and the occult, the unseen things, you see, the dark recesses of the unconscious, because the underworld is representative of our unconscious and our unconscious impulses. And it also rules primal fear. But also in the unconscious are often our greatest gifts. And if we have mindfulness, we can use that power very, very constructively for huge change in the world. It's only when it's used in an unconscious way for sort of control or manipulation or greed. And anybody that's got Pluto strongly placed in their chart often meets, if you like, that god of the underworld in themselves, whether they know that they are quite powerful, or they meet it in power struggles a lot with other people. So it needs a lot of consciousness to deal with the energy of Pluto. And Pluto rules the the intense, complex sign of Scorpio. Okay, so any Scorpios in the audience, whether you've got your moon or ascendant or sun in Scorpio, you might be able to relate to something I've got to say about Pluto. And if we look to see what was going on in society when Pluto was discovered in 1930, one of the biggest events, of course, was the rise of the Third Reich. So if you can imagine the ultimate control and manipulation that Hitler was trying to exert, I think he was like the mouthpiece for this kind of energy that was rising up through the collective. Much more positively, it was also the birth of depth psychology. And so we had people like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud coming up with these new ideas about the unconscious, which is very much about the underworld. And it's also well known that the Third Reich did use the occult and magic in their dealings with people. The word Pluto literally translates as riches, which I think is quite interesting, because though Pluto can be quite maligned and we can get very fearful when we've got a Pluto transit coming up, it does in fact mean riches. And in the myth, when Zeus usurped his father Saturn and was dividing up the spoils, he gave Neptune the rivers and the seas, and he gave Pluto the underworld. And you might think, well, that's a lesser inheritance, but it wasn't, because his law was irrefutable. Nobody was allowed in the underworld without dying, basically. So it's that sort of death and transformation image. Now, when Pluto moves very, very slowly around the zodiac, as you can imagine, and when it's transiting through a particular sign of the zodiac, whatever that sign rules comes up it's almost like it comes up into focus for a death and a transformation and a rebirth of the meaning of that sign. And if we look back to when it was travelling through Sagittarius, from 1995 to 2008, if we look at what Sagittarius rules, you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Sagittarius, being ruled by the big gas giant Jupiter, rules things like excess. Okay, so we had a time of huge inflation, and everybody was kind of spend. It's like there's no limits to Jupiter or Sagittarius. It seemed like everybody was on the make, sort of MPs, expenses, all that sort of stuff that was going on. Sagittarius also rules religion, and so this is when we had the biggest clash between Christianity and Islam. Again, that was highlighted. Sex scandals in the Catholic Church, Pluto ruling sex, all that it's like the dirt gets surfaced to be dealt with. It's also, Sagittarius is like our vision of the future, and during those years I know a lot of people were feeling that the future was quite dark. Sagittarius rules foreign cultures, and we had an awful lot in the news about illegal immigrants and that kind of thing. You see, because Pluto generates primal fear in people, so when the meaning of that sign comes up, there's often a lot of fear generated about that sort of thing. Before it was in Sagittarius, it was in Scorpio, which rules sex, and we had the whole AIDS thing. So whatever that sign rules comes up for, it really comes up in your face for transformation. So if you can imagine, when these two energies of Uranus and Pluto get into a conflict of each other, it's very, very, very difficult and very, it's like these two disparate energies clashing with each other. So if we look at the cycles of Uranus and Pluto, if we look back to when this particular cycle started, it was in the mid-60s. And if you look back, you can see what was going on then, because 47 years later, it's happening again. And even in kind of fashion and what's on the TV and that, there's a lot of harking back to the 60s, because it's like a sort of a reflection. There's a lot coming up around the energy that was around then. So we had, obviously it was around the world, the whole effects of this. We had this big uprising against authority. Students were standing up for the first time and demonstrating about the war in Vietnam. We had the combination of Pluto, that raw libidinal energy, combined with Uranus, that urge for revolutionary change. So it's all about emancipation from repression. There was huge rebellion against authority at the time, and convention. People were starting to stand up and saying, not in my name. Things are not right. In China, we had the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and Pluto ruling sex and Uranus ruling revolution. It was literally termed the sexual revolution at that time. Now, from now on, with the square coming into focus this summer, I don't think we'll have another sexual revolution as such, but what we might see is a lot more technological advancements to do with reproduction and cloning, maybe that sort of thing. Anything to do with reproduction, but big advances in that. And it also, this cycle is very much associated with advancements for women. And if you noticed in the news, I've noticed it particularly, there's a lot of countries where women are being suppressed. They're beginning to stand up against the masculine authority. And we'll see a lot more of that as well. Now, the most stressful aspect since the 1960s is beginning to occur. You have a build-up to something, and then it sort of tails off. So it's not exact, it's not exactly 1 year. But if you think of what was going on between Uranus and Pluto, since, for instance, Uranus entered Aries last year, it's really, really hotting up. I don't think, since 2003 till last year, Uranus was transiting through gentle Pisces, okay? And I don't think he was particularly happy going through Pisces, because if you think of that Uranian wanting to seek the truth and enlightenment in a sign more associated with illusion and fantasy than hard facts and reality, that's quite difficult. And the image I got was when we're driving along and you put the full beam on in the fog, thinking that you're going to see more, and it doesn't, it becomes more hazy. And this is the feeling that has been, it's all very wishy-washy, very undirectional, and that's how things have been. But last year, when Uranus moved into the more warlike, assertive sign of Aries, one of the first things we saw were all the Arab uprisings, because here we have the planet of revolution now in a warlike sign of Aries for 7 years. So there's going to be a lot more unrest. And also, I'd like to think that there'll be more clarity, more of the sort of the mysteries, the Piscean mysteries, if you like, that we could never get our heads around, might become more open, and we might find the truth of things. And we're already seeing that. There's lots of indicators to say that things like the MP's expenses, things that have been hidden, or the whole Murdoch thing as well, things that aren't quite right are now coming up to be readdressed. So we can see a lot more revolutionary energy in the next 7 years, that's for sure. Now Pluto moved into the earthy sign of Capricorn in 2008, and so it had gone from the excesses of Sagittarius into the earthy reality of Capricorn. So the first thing we're going to have to realise is the reality of facing all the excesses and what we're going to do about it. So it's like the party's over, belt tightening time, and well, the first thing that happened was the financial markets collapsing. Capricorn, if we look to see what that rules, we're going to see big changes in all those areas. Okay, so Capricorn, it rules authority figures, governments, the establishment, financial institutions, things like the NHS, all these institutions and governmental things, even the military, are coming up for change. And we can see it happening, can't we? It's difficult to go through change, but it's because it's necessary, it's because it's not working, and Pluto purges. It purges out what is not serving us anymore. So, hopefully, a lot of corruption will be exposed, and also what you can see in the Arab countries is that sort of the despots that have been in power for 40 odd years, this is a time when they're going to fall. So institutions and leaders that aren't serving us anymore will fall by the wayside. And that's not always a bad thing, but it can feel very difficult when it's going on. However, as I said, Pluto often rules through fear and manipulation and wanting control. And so if you've got Pluto in the sign to do with governments, if there's ever a time over the next, well, it will be in Capricorn for about 16 years, then we're going to see a real push forward for one world government, that kind of thing, the ultimate power of governments, which I think we can already begin to see, but also very interestingly the EU. I've looked at the charts of that. I mean, that's going through a very, very difficult period at the moment due to a Pluto transit. So how do you think Uranus the rebel is going to feel about more and more and more governmental control from Pluto and Capricorn? It won't be able to stand it, will it? It's going to burst out and rebel. So the tension between these two energies is already happening. It's already happening since Uranus moved into Aries last year, and since Pluto moved into Capricorn in 2008. The build-up is very slow. It's usually when a planet gets to about the middle of a sign that we see the most difficult thing. I mean, I just don't think that 2012 is the end of the world. I think you can look back through history and see the cycles of the planets, and you can see the process of change and evolution that we go through, which I find kind of exciting in lots of ways. So we're going to see a lot of changes to do with the institution, and a lot of conflict, but in the end it's to create a better society and for what isn't working at the moment. Now, for those of you who don't realise, countries have charts as well as people, and this is the chart of England, and the reason I've chosen this particular chart, which is the crowning of William the Conqueror on Christmas Day 1066, is for lots of reasons. Now, this gives us our personality, if you like, and this is why England's so different to Italy or Germany. You know, it's like each country has a personality, doesn't it? So this is the chart. It will be exactly the same for your own birth, and this is the birth of a nation. So this is the ascendant again, so this is the horizon. The sun is right up on the mid-heaven, because kings in those days were crowned at midday, probably precisely so that the sun would be at the point in the chart to do with your public standing. In a person it's usually represented by their career, but for a country it's their status in the world. So if you've got the sun up there, that solar energy right up there in mid-heaven, it's quite powerful. Now, the reason I think that England is quite a special country is not because I'm English, I don't really have much English blood in me, but it's more a feeling. It's more on a feeling level. But from this time, when the Normans invaded, they completely took over our culture and changed it dramatically. And since then, there's been a pretty much unbroken line of kings and queens. And if you ask anybody, everybody's heard of 1066. You know, it's really ingrained in the national psyche. Some astrologers use the 1801 chart, the unification of Great Britain, but interestingly enough, the sun is still pretty much in the same position in Capricorn. You live in a Capricorn country. And if you think about it, English is spoken, it's very, very widespread. I'm not sure it's the most dominant. I think perhaps one of the Chinese languages is the most dominant, but English is a very dominant language, and it's certainly the dominant language in new technology. It's known as the heart chakra of the world, so it has a very powerful energy. We also have a very unique geology. There's more different types of geology in the UK than there is anywhere around the world. You have the big continents, but they tend to have a sort of fairly unified geology. And with different geology, you get different earth energies. And I think this has an effect on its people, because we resonate to energies. We have the most crop circles in the world, and I think there's a reason for that. I think it's to do with how we process that kind of thing, and also how we're quite a bridge between America and Europe and the East. There's something quite significant about this country. And it's the only language whereby the meaning I is a capital letter. No other language puts a capital letter for I, which I think is just quite an interesting thing I found out recently. So, Capricorn country, what does this mean? Well, to give you a little bit of brief synopsis of Capricorn, they tend to be conservative and ambitious. They like to preserve their traditions, like the monarchy and our ancient laws. We're stoic and like to be seen as respectable. We need to build something solid that will last, because it's an earth sign. We're known for our stiff upper lip and somewhat cynical. We tend to be more melancholic and pessimistic in nature. We like to grumble and moan and worry a lot. But this is offset by a very dry, ironic sense of humour. It's like the British humour is known around the world, isn't it? Somebody like a character like John Cleese, I think, embodies that. I don't know if he is a Capricorn, but he certainly embodies that English personality. So the sun is right up there on the mid-heaven, so very prominent position for a country. Whatever sign's coming up over the horizon at the moment of birth is really, really significant because it's how you project yourself into the new situations throughout your life or for the country, how they project themselves into the world. And we've got the fiery sign of Aries coming up over the horizon. And this colours our personality a lot and our initial inroads. Aries is ruled by fiery competitive Mars, which embodies the dynamic masculine principle. Aries likes a conquest. He's a leader, not a follower. And that's why I think we became very, very uncomfortable when we get our leaders, like when Blair became George Bush's puppet. We don't like being like that in that situation. It's sort of humiliating somehow. So if you combine that Capricornian urge to build something solid and lasting and that Aries urge to go out and conquer in the world, that's what created the British Empire. And I always remember as a child looking at the globe and all the pink bits and thinking, wow, we're so tiny and yet we've gone out and sort of tried to conquer the world. And that's a kind of representation of a Capricorn sun with Aries rising. Muhammad Ali had that combination actually. He's a fighter and wants to succeed. So the last thing I want to say just about the chart of England is the moon. Now, the moon in the nation's chart represents our emotional life, our collective emotional life. And it's in the watery sign of Pisces here. It's tucked away. The chart's divided up into 12 houses. I don't have time to sort of go through them, but each house represents a different area. And Pisces is very highly sensitive, and I think this is what gives us our compassionate and very humanitarian side that we have as a nation. And this is what gives us our very generous welfare state and national health service. It's renowned in the world really, but I think that's that Piscean side. And you also see it when in times of crisis or when we want to raise money, like Live Aid, that was indicative, or Comic Relief. We're very good at helping, aren't we? Or even in times of adversity, like the Blitz spirit, that kind of thing. Now, every planet has, if you like, a good and a bad side, or a more positive and a more challenging side. The more shadowy side of the moon in Pisces is much more victim-like. And I think this is seen in the national problems that we have with alcoholism. Our teenage pregnancy rates are really high. We're bottom of the UNICEF league table for the care of children. And this is emphasised by the fact that the moon is in a very challenging square aspect with Uranus, which I've just described, and opposite Chiron, and he's the wounded healer. So it's like a kind of a national wound. And if you think about it, the way we are with children, it's not such a warm, cuddly nation, is it? We've got a wounded moon. Now, in terms of other things that Pisces rules, like arts and music, the moon in aspect to Uranus, a Piscean moon in aspect to Uranus, means that we tend to be kind of like world leaders in modern music, because it sort of fires up the new and gives us an interest in if you like, skills and talents in that area. And it also, because Uranus is the maverick, it gives us that eccentric side that we've got. The mad professor type, the sort of the English inventor. And it also gives our interest in alternative groups like this. So we're very kind of open as a country, I think. So if a person comes to me and says, well, what's going to happen in my life in 2012, or what aspects are going to be going on, it's exactly the same for a country. So what I would do is I put the person's chart or the country's chart in the middle, and then around the outside I put the positions of the planets to see what aspects they make to the natal chart. And that's how astrologers get to read what's, if you like, going to happen, or what energies are around for that person or country during a particular year. So, as you can see, those are the planets in 2012 around the outside of England's chart. So, the most significant thing that I noticed, and I described the very, very powerful nature of Pluto, you can see it's right on England's mid-heaven and sun, which is highly significant because it's the planet of death and transformation and rebirth. So, this could be a fantastic opportunity for England to really shine, or it can be a very, very testing time for us in terms of going through this change. Pluto demands that people are fairly squeaky clean, or if there's any hidden stuff, it tends to surface during this time. To give you an example of what can happen when Pluto goes over the sun of a person, when Pluto went over Margaret Thatcher's sun, that's when she came to prominent power. So I think it's quite interesting the way it operates. Now, a few years ago when they were doing the bids for the Olympic Games, and we were rank outsiders against France, I looked at the chart and I thought, we're going to get the Olympic bid, because Pluto, on that position of the chart to do with our status in the world, propels us onto the world stage for the whole world to look at us. And that's exactly what's happened. So everything that's going on in this country, the whole world will be focusing on it, exactly the same as the whole world was focusing on China when the Beijing Olympics were on, for good or ill. So it's a time to bring a lot of consciousness, hopefully, to show that we are a country that is more able to come into the enlightenment, if you like. But this is obviously a very challenging time for the country. It could be that it manifests as the government, with Pluto in Capricorn, exerting so much power and control that you instigate that rebellion. And I think it is going to be a summer of a lot of demonstrations and a lot of turmoil, actually, because it's such a fantastic event at which to voice your issues, if you like. Now, in terms of the Uranus-Pluto cycle, it's also associated with slavery. And again, we can see that we've got a new type of slavery. We've got the slavery of debt. And so they're getting people into debt from students at university, so they have to cope with that, and they'll be sort of enslaved then to the system. But again, it's also a time of that will happen, but also it's an opportunity to rebel against that and to create something new. Now, what's Uranus up to? Uranus is transiting through England's 12th house, the house of hidden enemies. It's the house of the hidden and the unconscious. Uranus also rules groups and societies. So if you can think of all those Promethean-type people that aren't happy about their freedoms being taken away or being restricted more and more, I think that Uranus, when it's in the 12th house, often bursts out quite suddenly. It can be quite shocking in its effects. So it's a time, I think, with Uranus being in the sign to do with hidden things, that there'll be groups and societies that gather together to create pockets that eventually will join up. And so when there is something that needs to change, then there can be this connectivity. And Uranus rules new technology, and I noticed in the Arab uprisings there was a lot of technological getting together, and that's how they were being able to organise their rebellions. So it could be that later this year that Uranus square Pluto, Uranus does reach breaking point and revolts. So we'll have to be quite careful, I think, for the flashpoints like the Diamond Jubilee and also the Olympics. To show you what can happen when Pluto goes on a sensitive spot in a nation's chart. When Pluto went on to America's ascendant in 2002, we had 9/11. So this is the kind of impact that Pluto can have. And to show you what was going on in the chart at the time, in the middle is the chart for America, which is for Independence Day. And round the outside is the chart of the first strike on the towers. So on this day, Pluto, here's America's ascendant, it's a Cancer country here, the Sun in Cancer, with Sagittarius rising. Pluto is at 12 degrees, America's ascendant is at 12 degrees. And when Pluto went over America's ascendant, he came as the Dark Lord of the Underworld, came as Pluto the Destroyer. Now, this could have been a fantastic opportunity, I think, for America to have looked at its own foreign policy. It's a bit like if we have a Pluto transit in our lives, and sometimes something pretty awful can happen, but there can be a lot of growth and change through that. It's like no pain, no gain. But I think America could have prevented this by just looking at its own foreign policy, but it didn't. So therefore, it projected Pluto out there, and, if you like, Osama bin Laden was seen as the Dark Lord of the Underworld coming to invade them. But it's like it's a projection. It's not looking at their own stuff that could be transformed and changed. So if you have a Pluto transit, it's an opportunity, but the more unconscious you are about it, if you like, the more devastating the effects that Pluto can have. And I think if you look at the myth of Pluto Persephone, it can give us some clues as well, because in lots of ways there's a naivety about America. It's almost like in its evolution, it's like a teenager. And when, in the myth, we have Persephone living an idyllic life with her mother Demeter. And Demeter is the earth goddess, and it was forever spring and summer. Everything was bountiful and flourishing, and there was no death. And then one day, Pluto comes out of the underworld, abducts Persephone, drags her into the underworld and rapes her. So he takes away her innocence in a really terrible way. And if you think of that image with what happened with America, it's kind of similar, isn't it? But it's almost like in life, we can't go through life with it being forever springtime. We have to go through these very, very great challenges to do with the harsh reality of life. And it's not all good. So, I think that myth is very, very striking when it comes to 9/11 actually, because their innocence was lost forever, as Persephone's was. And maybe sometimes innocence does need to be taken away for you to wake up to what it's like to kind of grow up and mature in a way. But if you look at the symbols for the World Trade Centers, Saturn is about physical structure. It's about status. It's in terms of the symbol of Saturn here, it's like the centre for world capitalism, the Twin Towers. And Saturn is in Gemini. If you look at the symbol for Gemini, it's like the Twin Towers. Gemini rules trade and commerce. So here we have Saturn in Gemini, and Pluto comes along and opposes it and brings devastation. That's just a symbol of Gemini on the right to show you how amazing astrology can be in its symbolism, to be honest. Now, the reason I'll show you this lovely man is the synchronicity that we often see in astrology between countries and their leaders. So here is a chart of George Bush and America. And for those of you who can't see at the back, the sun is at 13 degrees Cancer in both George Bush's and America's chart. I mean, isn't that phenomenal? So they both have exactly the same sun. It's almost like he had to be the mouthpiece for the nation during that time. And especially with what I found with Uranus going through Pisces, Uranus is very political and often speaks of the political life of the country, is our leaders often have their sun in the 12th house. The 12th house is the collective. So if you think of the sun being the mouthpiece for the collective, other leaders at that time, apart from George Bush, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and the Russian president, they all had their sun in the 12th house, which I thought was very interesting. It's almost like the collective really does elect its leaders, but it's also representative of the consciousness of the country. So what does that say with George Bush? Okay. So Barack Obama, is he any different? Well, when he was elected on the 4th of November 2008, we had the opposition in the heavens between Saturn, which is about, the old guard, if you like. It's very much to do with tradition and oldness. Uranus, opposite Uranus, which is different, bit of a maverick. And come the election, we went for Obama because he was much more of that Uranian spirit. He felt like a breath of fresh air. He was different. Just from his colour, he was different. Now, the thing is, when you choose one half of an opposition, then you get a backlash from the other. So to have chosen Uranus over Saturn, it doesn't mean Saturn goes away. That energy still comes in, and it can often really strike a reality, because what was going on was that the nation's Neptune is that longing in all of us for redemption, and it's right on Obama's Mars, his masculine drive. So therefore it's like the nation are thinking, a saviour. But the thing is with Neptune is that it's very illusional. It creates an illusion which isn't real. And so they got him on a pedestal which was really high, and people do this as well. You see it in charts between people, is that when their Neptune is on another person's personal planet, then they usually don't see them as human, they see them as godlike. And it's very dangerous to do that because they're going to fall off that pedestal. And we've seen that. You know, it's like when as soon as you get Saturn coming in with the hard reality, it creates problems. And it was so interesting the way McCain represented that Saturn energy and Obama represented that Uranian energy. Their Venuses, Obama's Venus is exactly the same as America's Venus. Venus is about your values. So the values, they're both in Cancer, and Cancer represents the home, family, homeland security, and with Pluto has been going over their Venus when they had all the sort of the financial problems, which they've still got now. When you have long-term transits, obviously the bad stuff isn't happening all the time, but what often constellates the energy of a particular transit is either a new moon or a full moon. And so I looked through all the full moons and new moons this year, and the most powerful one is this one, which is the 4th of June this year. And if we take a look at it, I can show you this. So here's England's chart in the middle, and the full moon, so we've got the Sun in Gemini and opposite the moon in Sagittarius. So you have to look at what aspects that full moon makes. And in this particular one, it is in a very dynamic, what's called a T-square, 90-degree aspect between between the moon and Mars and the sun. So it's 90 degrees from Mars to the full moon, which is very, very dynamic and quite challenging. So there's a lot of stressful energy tied up in this aspect. And in fact, the time we had a new moon square Mars was when we had the 7/7 bombings in 2005. So you can see the kind of the tension that's around. And the Mars is exactly on England's Saturn, which is her structure, so her infrastructure, which, you know, the biggest thing, of course, is that it's the weekend when they decided to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee. So, makes me wonder, I think maybe nothing will happen, but there'll certainly be a lot of tension with this particular full moon. So just watch out for that.
Time.
Oh yeah, sorry. Look at the time of 11:11, exactly. Isn't that amazing? I only just found that out recently, actually. Universal time, that is. So it will be 11 minutes past 12, British summer time. Okay, so going back to the chart of 2012, if we look back at all the previous Uranus-Pluto transits, it would appear definitely it's always a time of intense social and political upheaval, always. But we also get a lot of fantastic breakthroughs that happen often to do with technology or in some way bringing humanity on, or an event that happens. I think that this particular cycle is a bit different to all the others throughout history. And the reason being is this is the first time that we've had this square and this particular cycle since the discovery of Pluto. So therefore it's very much been awakened in our consciousness, in the collective. We understand these energies now, whereas, you know, in centuries past we didn't. So very, very powerful. It's a time that is being highlighted by so many prophecies and civilizations around the world as a time of change and transformation. also the world is a lot smaller place, so if anything happens, it's transmitted around the world, and we all feel it more, don't we? We all feel connected to that event, that major event. A bit like when 9/11 happened, we were all watching it on the television straight away. It's also the crossover from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, which is huge in terms of an epoch. And because when you've got the death of one age and the birth of another, it's never easy. As a species, we don't like big changes. It sort of makes us filled with anxiety, and there's a lot of collective anxiety around at the moment. If any of you have seen the Zeitgeist film, it's very good, the description of the turning over of each of the ages, because each age has its own gods. The Piscean age is very much marked by the Christianity, and even the symbol for Christianity is the fish. So we're looking towards a new god, and the Aquarian god, I imagine, I think will be sort of more worship of technology, if you like, or even that God isn't out there. We are all God, because Aquarius is very much to do with the brotherhood of man, you know, that we are all equal, that kind of feeling. All the outer planets have changed signs in the last few years, and when an outer planet changes sign, we get different things come into focus very, very powerfully. And I think that the biggest shift started really in 2008 when Pluto moved into Capricorn. And so, you know, over the last few years we've had these major shifts which we're seeing. Now, it all seems a bit sort of, you know, a bit difficult, doesn't it? So let's look at the two planets that may become supporters and help us through this period. And I'd look at the two planets most associated with spirituality, because that might be able to help give us a bigger picture, and optimism. And so I'll look at Neptune and Jupiter. Neptune in the chart is very, very powerfully placed on the ascendant with Chiron, the wounded healer. So I'll go on to explain that a bit more. Neptune has just moved back into its own sign of Pisces after 165 years, which is very, very significant, because when a planet's in its own sign, it's at its most powerful. Now, Neptune is very much to do with, actually I just want to mention that with it being with Chiron, it can also signify painful disillusionment, because you've got the two energies combined. And I do think it's quite significant that it is on the ascendant of the 2012 chart, because so many people have got expectations of this time. You know what I was saying about Obama? You know, it's like, wow, we're going to move to the fifth dimension, wow, we're going to reach this amazing consciousness. Maybe we won't. Maybe we've just got to carry on and do the hard work, which I don't think there are any shortcuts to enlightenment. And so this could be representative of a huge disillusionment. Now, Neptune has been in Aquarius for the last 14 years, since 1998. And Aquarius is very much to do with new technology. Neptune is to do with how are we all one, how are we all connected. It's that sort of longing for that pre-birth experience, if you like. So how have we got that feeling? We've got it through new technology, haven't we? And in the last 14 years, we've seen the most incredible upsurge of new technology to do with us feeling connected. Mobile phones, internet, it's just been quite incredible. Now, let's have a little bit of a closer look at Neptune. I think it's got a beautiful planet. And here's the god on the left-hand side. Neptune rules watery, sensitive Pisces. It rules the collective, our connection with the numinous. It rules anything that's intangible, arts, music, spirituality. What are these things? Where do they come from? We don't know. They inspire us, don't they? It's like the opposite of Saturn, which is cold, hard reality and physical manifestation. It's about glamour and fantasy. It transports us out of our reality. It's where we seek redemption. It's that longing in all of us, and if we've got a very strong Neptune in our charts, or Pisces, you might be able to relate to this, because it doesn't feel comfortable about being incarnated in our separate bodies. It's that longing for that pre-birth experience of having no responsibility, just wanting to escape, really. But the more negative, darker side of Neptune is the disillusionment. It can create deception, confusion, addiction, anything to get us out of ourselves. And now it's gone back into its own sign, and it's no longer in Aquarius. My fantasy is that we won't need modern technology to feel connected, because we'll really develop our telepathic or psychic skills. And if you look back 165 years ago, that was a real upsurgence of the spiritual movement. And we're going to start seeing that very, very strongly. A lot more to do with the paranormal, that kind of thing. But more than anything, it's about working selflessly, because it's egoless. It's about being in service to the collective and in very much benevolence towards mankind. It's about working compassionately. It's very much anti-war, it's very spiritual. Neptune is the higher octave of Venus and represents unconditional universal love of the highest order. So to see Neptune so powerfully placed on the ascendant there, you know, you can really sort of imagine us getting far more humanitarian and not wanting all the harder aspects of that Uranus-Pluto, which is much, much more difficult. Now Jupiter, he's the big gas giant of the solar system. Whatever Jupiter touches, it expands that principle, and you might meet very Jupiterian people. They're larger than life, they're jovial. It's difficult to keep that Jupiterian optimism and enthusiasm down. He's the king of the gods, full of creative potential. He rules belief systems and philosophical thought. He brings luck and opportunity to whatever sign or house Jupiter's in. And interestingly enough, he's more prominent in death charts than Pluto. So you might think, what? But it's how I imagine it is because he's so expansive and our bodies are so containing that it literally means an expansion out of the physical. So let's look at the aspects that they make in the 2012 chart. And Jupiter is at the apex of a very interesting configuration, this green line here, which is called a yod, or finger of God, and it's very fated. And the two other planets that are involved in this particular configuration are Saturn and Pluto. So you've got the Saturn side that would give seriousness and a reality to this, and the Plutonic side which would give transformation and depth. Now, if we were going to have a shift in consciousness, then the sign of Gemini, which rules the mind and communication, it would be very apt to have Jupiter in this sign. So, if there were any shifts in consciousness, this is a particularly apt aspect. Now, we're in a very, very unique position in history at the moment. And I think more than anything, because of our new technology, it's really brought us on leaps and bounds way beyond our imagination. And this is only the beginning. My son, who works in computing, he comes back and he says, well, you know, that all the plans that are in the footing for new technology, and it is quite incredible. And I think it's going to accelerate a lot more. It's never before, without computers and that, you couldn't compute all the past cycles of the planets. It's a fantastic tool for astrology because it can show you all the different cycles and what happened. And we can see then, we can get an idea. It's a time of big technological breakthroughs. It's all about the breaking down of outmoded restrictions that no longer serve us, so that we can gain more liberty and more freedom to be who we are. It's associated with things like the abolition of the slave trade, emancipation of women and feminism in general, so that there's more equality in the world. It's about overcoming restrictions placed on us by outmoded religions and authority figures. This is all about the times that we're in. And I just want to pay homage actually to Richard Tarnas, who is an academic, and his last book, Passion of the Western Mind, was about the evolution of consciousness in Europe and the West, I should say. And it took him about 30 years of research with this book because he wanted to plot the cycles of the outer planets and the effect it had on society. And it's an absolutely brilliant book. Of course, he's vilified by his peers, but because he's come out as an astrologer, and you don't do that in academic circles. But yeah, I really, really recommend that book. Now, in terms of maybe a bit of advice, I think we would do well to go back a few thousand years to the gods, at the time of the gods. And this is the temple at Delphi. And with us entering this time of change, if we look back to the wisdom of the gods, there were only two things that they required of mankind, and they were inscribed above the temple at Delphi. So the first inscription was, "Man, know thyself." And the second one was, "Nothing in excess." Now, if we really embodied those two things, I think we could come on as humanity just incredibly. But it's something we really, really struggle with as human beings, which is such a shame. But I'd like to leave you with those thoughts and to think how you might empower yourselves and gain by knowing yourself, because each one of us can create a little ripple around ourselves, which is a fantastic way to create change throughout the whole world. And though it will be a bumpy ride, I think that it will be an exciting one and a much needed time of change. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm sure you'll agree there's a lot of really, really interesting insights there. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask Helen?
Just wondering, I don't know if ever listens to Alan Watts, the podcasts, and he's sometimes a bit disparaging of 60s and that type of time, and he says it was all set up by thinkers like Carol Bernays and invented a lot of that type of culture. And do you think Helen, possibly the New World Order could be following astrology
I'm sure it
to
does.
set their events up like
Yeah.
9/11? They could have said do it that day and things like that.
Oh yeah, it's well known. It is well known. Yeah. Oh, you can be sure of it, because with such sort of epoch-changing events, yeah, they're very well aware of the transits and how to use their energy. And I'm sure, say, Hitler did when you know, and the Third Reich used occult knowledge, if you like, for their own ends, and that's when it gets dangerous.
I mean, the fact that they have chosen the worst weekend of the year they could have done to have had the Diamond Jubilee, I mean, it really does make you wonder. I mean, if you go onto the internet, you'll find a lot of dire warnings. I mean, you know, to be frank, what a lot of people are fearing, and we hope it doesn't happen, it is some kind of false flag terror attack. They blow up the Queen's barge in the Thames or whatever it is they're going to do, and then, of course, that gives them the opportunity to bring in every draconian law they ever want for the Olympics. So that the south of England in that scenario goes into basically court-martial. These are the fears. We hope that doesn't happen. And as you know, Helen alluded to at the end there, hopefully with a bit of positive thinking, we can, you know, create something different. But that said, I think you have to be aware of the potential dangers, and the more that people voice them, of course, the less likely it is that they can do it, because then it would seem too obvious. So it's a kind of a tricky thing. You don't want to focus on these very dark negative things, but equally to just pretend it's not going on. There's a kind of a danger. It's very difficult to strike that balance, but certainly there's an awful lot of stuff going around on the internet, and the Spooks series a couple of years ago had the Olympic Stadium being blown up by an atomic bomb and all of that. And you know, there's a lot of people that think that these things are predictions, because if you look back at what happened on TV before 9/11, you had almost exactly the same scenarios repeating, and the Lone Gunman series, we had the plane heading for the World Trade Center and all of that. So some are saying, isn't it weird, what comes up in fiction then tends to happen. So we've got to strike that balance, and you know, I think you did that very well, and showing us that there is a balance. You know, you've got a lot of things. It almost depends what the collective chooses to focus on as to where it goes.
It's true consciousness.
You know,
The level of consciousness.
true consciousness. Yes.
Have you done the chart of the Queen for that weekend to see whether there's anything in her chart?
I haven't actually, no. No. It is interesting.
I mean, suffice it to say that if something did happen to her, that would be a massive blow to the psyche of the whole country. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
You know.
Because even today, actually, on some level, our monarchy has that status, you know, in the collective. It's so part of our nation.
Especially after seeing her rededicate herself at her age now. Everybody else is claiming more, they want raises in their pensions, all that, and our Queen is still working in her 80s, whatever she is. I mean, who wants to do that?
So Charles's face probably fell at that.
Philip.
Well, I think I fell out again.
Andy, what do you think the significance is of the Queen lighting all these beacons, fuelled by bottled fuel on the 4th of June, throughout the country?
It's the kind of thing they've done before, in fairness. It's not a brand new symbolism. I think they did that on one of the previous Jubilees or something, didn't they? What do I think? I mean, it depends. Obviously, for anybody that's new to this, there are some people that think the Queen's a reptilian alien lizard, you know, in which case they want her bumped. I mean, you know, this is the weird world of the alternative view. So people have read, yes, I know a lot into the symbolism of the lighting of the beacons, and they see a lot of occult stuff
She's
here.
urging all the churches to light beacons, and all the old churches are built on old pagan sites which are on ley lines.
Well,
So
indeed,
in effect,
yes.
she's lighting up all the ley lines.
Lighting up the light, but on the other hand, you can see that as a good thing. Do you know what I mean? It depends where you're coming from. You might say, well, yeah, the royal family, they've got a lot of mystical links, and it's a kind of a nod to that in a positive way. But yeah, of course, others say it's all an occult plot. We have to say briefly at this point, I mean, the Olympics, I know we have talked about this before, but isn't it amazing that you've got not only the Olympic mascots look like the all-seeing eye, a single eye on a pyramidal body. Have you seen the lighting? Have you looked at the lighting at the stadium? Each lighting gantry is the all-seeing eye at the top, and it's exactly the same proportion as the pyramid on the dollar bill with the illumined ones, the all-seeing eye. It's even got the same gap between the capstone and the bottom. It can't be coincidence. It's either somebody having a laugh, right, or it's somebody being very... I could show you. Do you want to see it? Yeah. I could show you. Bear with me 10 seconds. You can all read my desktop. Actually, you can't. No, I'm going to stop you doing that. Too late. No, you can see a little bit of it. And I appreciate that this is something that you've got to take your own view on. So there's the Olympic mascots, okay? So you all know about those, that they look a bit like the all-seeing eye on the pyramid. But then, if you look at the lighting gantries, is that coincidence? I don't think it is a coincidence. And I'm not the only person that's picked up with this. So, in the gantry, this one even has an eye in the middle. Look, there's a gap in the middle. I don't know if that's the same. We were looking at this the other day, weren't we? But then you've got the dead bit of the gantry where there's no lighting, which is almost exactly the same proportion as the gap from the capstone there. It just seems too much coincidence.
It's a very practical structure with a tripod of sorts, isn't it?
Very practical. But yeah, Jason, you spotted the other day also, if you look at long shots of the stadium, in between these, you can just see one there. When you look at them, they're more conventional pyramid of Giza shape. So it's like, it's packed with Egyptian occult symbolism. And then when you look at the long shots of it, and you've got Canary Wharf Tower, which of course has its own pyramid on the top, it's uncanny. And it cannot be coincidence. But anyway, I'm taking over there. Has anybody got any astrology questions?
It's probably trying to influence the British athletes to get them to go notes.
Well, I hope so, but bear in mind the fear that the authorities are cranking up around the Olympics is massive. You've got however many thousand troops from America coming over to guard their own athletes, allegedly. They've got surface-to-air missiles stationed all around the outside of the stadium. Now, there have been at least 2 games since the War on Terror began, so it's not like, we're in times that are suddenly so different, but it's like they're really cranking up fear and terror. Or they're expecting something. You look at it 2 ways. What are they expecting and why? So it's a very funny thing, but the whole thing basically does seem to be some kind of weirdo Illuminati temple. Even if it's a joke, they thought this will get them going, but it's still real. It's still the reality of what we've got there. So
The owners of Westfield Stratford are the same owners who own the Twin Towers, apparently.
oh, are they? Oh God, well, that's very interesting.
If you want to search it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And Fred Lowe and Larry Silverstein, 2 owners.
Larry Silverstein.
Yeah.
Well, of course, he was the guy who made the famous comment about Building 7 at the World Trade Center, wasn't it? Where it said, we made the decision to pull it,
Yeah.
which is a demolition term, of course. And then when somebody said, did you actually mean that you demolished it? And then realising that maybe that wasn't such a good thing to admit to, he said, no, I meant pull the fireman out of the building. So he's a very suspicious character. Anyway, do we have any other questions before we...
It's just lovely to see you making comparisons between one age and another. Very interesting. And although, personally, I'm an Aquarius, my mother came into labour with me in Capricorn and had me in Aquarius, so I've been a crazy mixed up kid ever since. No, I made a comparison actually, just as a warning to people here, between 25th of July last year and this week, because I do some stock market analysis, and this week resembles very much the same as 25th of July last year. We could be on the cusp of another mini crash. It could happen in the next 2-3 weeks.
Is there anything, do you think, about another crash in the charts? Or might speak of that?
Well, the whole time that Pluto's going through Capricorn, which rules the financial institution, we're going to see a death and a transformation, because anything that isn't working and any dirt that is being buried is going to come up for change.
because we can't keep on sustaining this level of debt, which is growing
No.
exponentially.
No.
And the whole thing's got to implode later
Yes.
this year or next year.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is just a forewarning of things to come, I think,
Yeah,
in the next
I mean,
week.
it's very typical of Pluto transit, this, what we're seeing. You know, if you think, as soon as it went into Capricorn, we saw the death of Woolworths, all these old institutions, and now, you know, Sussex Station is a lot of things that have been around for a long time are dying, which is typical. I just want to mention something about Venus because the Mayans did really revere Venus, and I forgot to mention it in the talk, that about Yod formation with Jupiter at the apex. Venus is opposite, and we've got the Venus transit on the 5th, 6th of June, so just after the full moon there. I know that a lot of people on the internet especially, and they always talk about Venus, so the goddess of love and light, and it's all wonderful, but every planet has a light and a dark side. And this is something that the Mayans or the Aztecs would have known, because they used to worship Venus. If it appeared, I think it was as the morning star, it meant war. If it was an evening star, it meant a peaceful period. Now, the Venus transit going over the Sun is a very rare astronomical event. They come in pairs of 8 years, so you get 2. So there's one in 2004, if you remember, and then one this summer, and then not another one for over 100 years. So we'll never see another one in our lifetime. So I think it's highly significant that if there's also this Venus transit going over the Sun this summer and around that weekend. I've just started to investigate things like volcanic activity and that sort of thing, previous Venus transits, because I think it was in 1600s, I can't remember exactly, we had Vesuvius erupting, and then on another one Mount Krakatoa erupted. So there does seem to be a kind of correlation between Venus transits and Earth changes.
Did you say that Pluto rules from under the Earth, is it right?
He rules the underworld.
Yes, who rules the underworld, yes,
Yes.
because this might reflect on possible volcanic activity, earthquakes, imminent.
Yes. Yeah. Pluto going through the Earth sign, because Capricorn's an Earth sign, it's anything to do with the Earth as well.
And whether the solar activity can react with the internal engine of the Earth, I don't know, but something is happening, something angry is happening within the Earth, I think.
Yeah, and also sort of a little bit more slightly worrying, but as I say, these things don't always manifest in the way we think they're going to. Whereas as soon as Uranus went into Aries, which is far more fiery and warlike, we had Fukushima, so you have that again, the words uranium and plutonium buzzing around the whole time, and this summer we are going to have the exact square, first of the exact squares. Just, you wonder that even if nothing happens, you'll hear a lot about it. Do you see what I mean? Because it's suddenly coming into the consciousness. Oh yes, uranium and that sort of nuclear issues, if you like, will come to the fore.
It certainly would if Israel nukes Iran.
But it's just interesting that it's come into the consciousness, it's come into the news, because it comes into focus somehow.
And then you mentioned new technology, and maybe new technology in weaponry, and
Could be in any
like
direction.
HARP, probably
We could
most
be
people know about HARP.
outstanding discoveries with the Hadron Collider, that kind of thing, that really brings a new consciousness to us. because you know, if they discovered something amazing about the working of the universe, that is a bit like when we discovered the world, what is that? You know, it
And
could be on that level.
they're set to report in December. There's something on the radio every day, and they will release their report with their findings. They basically think that by December they will know for sure whether the Higgs boson is real or not.
Because it was going to be this summer, wasn't it? Yeah, and so it's December now.
Yeah.
Very coincidental.
Yeah.
Or synchronistic.
Yes. We'll find out the press conference is on the 21st.
Listen, we're going to have to draw to a close. Before we thank Helen, if anybody is curious to know my view on 2012, and you're in Dorking tomorrow evening, I'm speaking at the Dorking Awareness Centre, open to the public, in the Oddfellows Hall at about 7:30. You might have a look up on the website truthagenda.org, and you can see talks coming up. So we'll be talking more about that tomorrow evening. Thank you all for coming. I know most of you know this. If you're new and you want to hear about our meetings on the net yourselves, just pop your email address down on this board here. You've got some things to look at here. Helen is too humble to say it. She gives readings. If you want to have a personal reading with us, a few leaflets here. So do take one. I'm sure you'll agree that was really great stuff. I know I'm biased, but it really is great stuff. So please, big hand for...
The information where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.